In the previous episode, I summed up the brief history of Austro-Hungarian submarines in the pre-war era. As I mentioned then, the dual monarchy had 6 subs overall, and these were primarily experimental, not meant for actual warfare. Therefore, when the Great War broke out, Austria-Hungary did what it could to quickly bolster its tiny fleet of submarines using all available options. In this video, I will detail these efforts and the wartime performance of the K&K Kriegsmarine's U-boats. In late 1914, it was decided that sailing the 5 boats of the U-7 class from Germany to the Adriatic through Gibraltar was too risky, so these were instead sold to the Imperial German Navy. As a stopgap measure, Austria-Hungary finally purchased the 3rd boat of the U-5 class from Whitehead and commissioned it as U-12. Given the fact that both U-1 and U-2 were being modernized, still awaiting their new diesel and electric engines and periscopes at Pola, the Navy could only count on 5 boats in total. Despite being training ships, both U-3 and U-4 made several, mostly unsuccessful sorties in the Adriatic, along with reconnaissance missions. All 3 ships of the U-5 class were now based at Cattaro, much closer to the Otranto barrage, which the Entente navies had implemented to prevent any Austro-Hungarian vessels from entering the Mediterranean Sea. In December 1914, U-12, under Linienschiffleutnant Egon Lerch, torpedoed and damaged the French battleship Jean Bart, which they mistakenly reported as sunk. In fact, only the wine storage was damaged, although they barely missed vital parts of the ship, so it returned to service after a few months of repairs at Malta. 1915 was much more eventful. Both U-1 and U-2 returned to Trieste, from where they were sent on reconnaissance patrols to dissuade the Italians from approaching the city. They were now outdated, so they could only serve in this role, apart from training duties. U-3 made an unsuccessful attack on an Italian armed merchant cruiser. She was rammed by her opponent and then sunk by a French destroyer, with 1/3 of the crew lost. The rest were captured. U-4 captured small vessels and then torpedoed and sank an Italian armored cruiser, which was her greatest success. In the same year, U-5 sank a French armored cruiser, while U-6 was unsuccessful, and U-12 sank a Greek cargo ship, but was then lost when it hit a mine and sank near Venice. Interestingly, the U-boat flotilla was expanded with a French sub, the Curie, after it had been sunk by 2 Austro-Hungarian vessels near Pola. Given that it was a large and valuable craft, salvage efforts were launched and were successful in early 1915, followed by commissioning in June as SM-U-14. Around the same time, 5 German-type UB coastal submarines were purchased. These were delivered by rail and then assembled at Pola as members of the U-10 class. They were small, with only 2 torpedo tubes and 2 torpedoes in total, but they also received deck guns. In 1915, while still in German service, U-10 and U-11 sank 1 vessel each, and U-16 sank another one. As a class, they were not particularly successful though. 4 additional boats were ordered, based on a Danish design that was already outdated. These were to become members of the U-20 class, small in size, with only 2 torpedoes, unreliable engines, and other technical issues that required significant modifications. Due to political considerations, manufacturing had to be evenly divided between Austrian and Hungarian firms. These boats could only enter service in early 1917. Already in 1915, another 6 subs were ordered from Germany based on the type UB-2 design. Another 2 were added in 1916, so the U-27 class eventually had 8 boats. These were 37 meters long and displaced 264 tons surfaced, with 2 bow torpedo tubes, a deck gun, and a machine gun each. They were the last domestically built subs entering service in late 1917. In the preceding year, 1916, while the Navy was still waiting for these additional subs to be delivered, U-6 sank a French destroyer, but just 2 months later, it got stuck in the anti-submarine net at the Otranto barrage, and it had to be abandoned as it came under fire. Her entire crew was then captured. With that, U-5 became the last remaining boat of her class. In that same year, U-11 failed to torpedo a British sub, but U-15 sank several vessels, while U-16 sank an Italian destroyer shortly before its own demise. Her sister ship, U-17, also sank an Italian destroyer along with a sailing vessel. U-14, the captured French sub, spent most of the year undergoing modernization, while the new boats were still going through their initial trials. 1917 was a busy year, with more subs entering service. U-4 sank an Italian troopship and a tug, while joining a raid on the Otranto barrage. U-5 hit a mine and lost 6 crew members, but she was salvaged and repaired later on. U-15 continued her lucky streak, while U-14 returned to service and sank her first ship, followed by another 5 on a subsequent sortie, under the command of Georg Ritter von Trapp. One of her victims was Milazzo, reportedly the largest cargo ship in the world. Members of the U-20 class continued to suffer from technical and other issues. U-20 was accidentally rammed by the light cruiser Admiral Spaun and spent 7 months in the dock. U-21 had a leak and also had to be repaired, while U-22 sank in her own harbor. The U-27 class fared much better, as U-27 sank a British destroyer and other ships, while her sister ships also did well, except for U-30, which was sunk in that same year. 2 more German Type UB-2 boats were obtained, but U-43 and U-47 were much less successful under Austro-Hungarian command. Only the latter of the two was able to score more hits and sink 3 more vessels. Austria-Hungary entered the final year of the war with 21 U-boats, roughly half of which were modern and ready for combat. These were the U-27 and U-43 classes. Both U-1 and U-2 were declared obsolete and served only as training ships. U-4 did not score further hits, while U-10 hit a mine and was towed for repairs to Trieste, and only U-15 remained fairly successful, sinking a few more smaller ships. U-14, which had sunk a British tanker and an Italian steamer back in 1917, and also sailed to Corfu under the guise of its original French flag, was unable to repeat its previous successes under its new commanders, while all 4 members of the U-20 class were also unsuccessful in their attempts. U-23 was even lost when an Italian destroyer attacked it. Boats of the U-27 class continued sinking ships. U-27 became the most successful Austro-Hungarian sub, but U-28, U-29, U-31, U-40, and U-41 also sank a few. They all survived the war, proving the design's effectiveness and value. U-43 did not have any successes in 1918, but U-47 did sink 3 ships in total. Of course, this did not have a major effect on the war, and by late 1918, morale in the Navy sank to a new low. Overall, out of 28 ships, 8 were lost, in return for sinking 86 merchant and 18 warships, and capturing another 12 merchant vessels. After the armistice, most of the surviving subs were ceded to France, and they were then scrapped in 1920, with the sole exception of U-14, which rejoined the French Navy. I should mention that more boats were under construction or in the initial phases of planning when the war ended. Both coastal and ocean-going submarines were in this group, but the incomplete subs, the U-48, U-50, and U-52 classes, were scrapped after hostilities ceased, while the 9 boats of the U-101 class and the 2 members of the U-107 class were laid down but never launched. Another interesting detail is that several German U-boats assisted Austro-Hungarian efforts in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea under new or unchanged designations, sinking dozens of ships during the war. And with this, I conclude this video. Thank you for watching.